Hello and welcome to Exhibit A. Today we're going to talk about grandparents. Almost everybody loves grandparents. I sure do. And our speaker today, Victoria Abbott. I don't know. Do you love grandparents?
Of course. And my kids have wonderful grandparents. And yeah.
Okay.
I had good grandparents growing up. Grandparents are the best.
Okay. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about whether or not grandparents have a right to visitation in a family law case. Now, this is a controversial type of topic because most people, including yours truly, believe that grandparents are the greatest thing since sliced bread, okay? But the U.S. Supreme Court has made some rules with regard to that, and it is going to show you that maybe they don't have the rights that some people think they should have, and really what they should be expecting if they're trying to assert their rights, and what the legal analysis is. At the end of this podcast, I think that you're going to learn a lot about whether you should file a motion for grandparents' rights, and if you don't file a motion, which might be the smart thing to do, what you should do to make sure that you get those rights. Okay, Tori. So we're talking about Baladran. Is that the name of the case?
It is, yes. In fact, let's see. You're right. Baladran is the case.
Okay. And my understanding of this is your kind of your typical grandparent case that we see come up on appeal. There's appellate court decisions that I've read through the years, ever since a case called Troxel, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case that was published. I don't know, maybe I'm getting there, maybe 15, 20 years ago. I don't know. But I remember it being published somewhere around maybe 2005 or something like that, if I'm right. But Troxel was a case that determined what the constitutional rights are of a parent in making decisions as to grandparent visitation. And really contrary to that, we've got some codes, right? We've got grandparent codes in California or codes that talk about grandparent visitation. And so there's been some conflict through the years, with regard to the rights versus the constitutional rights. And so let's talk about this case a little bit. My understanding is that it starts off like most of them do, it's just one parent. You have a case with a mom that's suffering from the death of her husband. She's got a couple of children. There's the grandparents. They have visitation. Visitation's going kind of okay, and then eventually we find ourselves in court. The trial courts make some orders, and somebody's not happy. It goes up on appeal. So, with that background, why don't you give us the real layout of the facts, and then we could dissect the decision and then talk about the practical implications.
Okay. If I'm redundant, cut me off. But as you mentioned,
you never.
We have a mother, we have two daughters, and dad passes away, sadly, of COVID-19 complications. And then following dad's passing, the grandparents are having fairly reasonable visitation. They're seeing them fairly frequently. There's this brief period where mask mandates are lifted, and mom's kind of going through some struggles with the kids, right? And they're not maybe seeing the grandparents as frequent, but we know that those visitations then resume, and they're seeing them, a pretty reasonable amount the court lays out. And as you mentioned, they go to the trial court, and the grandparents are requesting, I believe the schedule they were asking for was every other weekend and a weekday visit, which, as you mentioned, they got some interim orders, temporary orders, and then we have a trial, and the court actually grants the motion in favor of the grandparents and does make an order, in fact, that they are going to have every other Sunday, I believe, and a Wednesday weekday visit is the ultimate orders at the trial level. And as you indicated, we get to the appeals level, and mom is saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't agree with that ruling. So let me know if you want me to keep going or if you want to interject here. Okay, so then the appeals court ultimately agrees with mom, and we get this wonderful analysis of the family code, as you mentioned, with respect to the Constitution and parental rights, and then, of course, the precedent case law as well.
So we know, and there's a case. So we're going to go further, audience. Don't worry about it. Getting into the deeper, but we know that she prevailed on appeal.
Yes.
Okay, which means that it was remanded, and grandparents didn't get any orders.
Correct.
Okay, so let's dig into the facts a little bit more before we get into what happened in the trial court.
Okay.
So the facts are interesting to me and sad, very, very sad, because we're talking about young people here. There's a young father with young children. he gets COVID, and I believe that he dies a month after he gets COVID, from what I read.
Yes.
Very, very sad.
Very sad.
And of course, the grandparents, his parents, are devastated. I'm sure that the wife was devastated, and the little kids are now without a dad. Grandparents want the kids to remember the father, and they say that we want to talk to the kids about our experiences when your father was growing up. And only we can provide that information. And there was some visitation or interaction, bonding between the grandparents and the children prior to the father's death, right?
Correct.
Okay, and I believe that there was some babysitting and things like that went on?
Yeah, it seemed like from reading in between the lines, it was fairly frequent contact. I mean, there wasn't a set schedule, but Mom was certainly allowing the children to see the grandparents. They do allude that there was a period where, I think it was 8 months, where they weren't really able to have visitation. But the reason being, according to the facts of the case, is that there was a lot going on, right? Mom was going through her own grievances. But absent that 8-month period, it seemed like it was fairly what we would call regular visitation. And Mom was agreeable to that, and she even testifies to that at the trial level. I'm not trying to withhold the kids. I just want to have some say over when this visitation takes place.
Yeah, and so grandparents had a relationship with the kids before father dies. And then after he dies, as you've indicated, Mom allows the grandparents regular visitation. She's not like she's just cutting them off. But from what I understand is that she had to go to her own counseling. She was grieving. You can read between the lines that she was suffering. And I thought also interesting is one of the kids was suffering as well, was maybe some behavioral problems, needed some therapy. You could only imagine why, right? I mean, of course, that's what was happening. So, she was offering visitation even when the grandparents filed their motion.
She was, yes.
Right? And there was the interim orders that went into effect, and she complied with the orders, and then they go to trial.
Yes.
Right? And at the trial, from what I understand, is that the grandparents repeated what they said in their declaration, which is, we are the ones that could talk about the father, keep his memory alive for the children, talk about how he was when he was a kid, growing up, all the great things that grandparents could do, and it's in their best interest to have this visitation with us. So we should have alternate weekends and a midweek visit, and it should be ordered by the court. Mom, on the other hand, says, hey, I've been giving visitation. It's never been a problem. It's just that it should be, when I say that's not right, I should be listened to. It shouldn't. There should be no orders.
Yeah, she says, let me set the schedule.
Yeah,
I'm reasonable. I'll set the schedule, but let me kind of pick and choose. And she kind of brings up the fact that these kids have activities and sport events, and she just wants to be able to have some control of those schedules, like many of us parents do. So that's Mom's argument on the other side.
Okay, so. She loses at the trial court level because the trial court says, I think that it's in the best interest of the kids to have visitation with the grandparents. And I also think it's important for them to learn and have that connection with their father. So the trial court buys what the grandparents' attorney was arguing. So Mom appeals. On appeal, same arguments are kind of made, I think, except for there's a legal analysis that I thought was worthwhile us discussing today because it's something that I never really took a close look at is what grandparent visitation has to consider by the trial court. What does the trial court have to look at? And there was a fundamental error in the trial court's reasoning here. And I don't know if you want to talk about that or if you want me to talk about that, but from what I saw was the trial court said it's in the best interest of the children. And the Court of Appeals said, hey, that's not the standard. The standard is, would it be detrimental to the children if they didn't visit the grandparents? So it's not like a custody dispute between two parents.
Yeah. I read it also as almost like there's a presumption in place, right? Is my understanding correct? So I thought that was very interesting, too. We talk about presumptions in family law a lot and the fact that there's this kind of presumption that exists as a parent that you are going to act in the best interest of your children. And as you mentioned, it's the other party's burden to overcome and, show it's detrimental that there would be no visits.
Yeah. So the Troxel decision stated that if there's a fit parent, then there's constitutional rights to be a parent. And it would be wrong for a trial court or even the legislator to legislate in these rights that really override a fit parent's decision making. And that's one of the things that I thought is a strong consideration that we have to have. And I wish that it would kind of influence other decisions that are on grandparents' rights. That parents do have constitutional rights to parent, and stuff. And sometimes it seems that the courts are yanking away rights from parents, and it's sad to see that, But in this case, going back to the test, it's not best interest of the child. Okay, yeah, I might agree with you that the kids need their grandparents, right? Yeah, okay, the kids would be better off, if they knew more about their father and they had this close continuing relationship and all this other stuff. And alternate weekends could be in their best interest, but that's not the standard. You got to show me why it would be detrimental to the kids to not have the relationship. And by the way, we're also going to take into consideration in this analysis whether mom was sharing, right? And that's a third point in this decision that I thought was educating, at least for me. I didn't realize that the court also weighed in how much or if the mom is actually giving visitation. That's actually part of the analysis.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting as well, especially in contrast to other cases where the court pointed out mom was actually giving a lot more visitation than some of the precedent cases that existed. And it's interesting, when we talk about grandparents' rights, it just made me think, well, what about grandparents that are across state lines or it's such a unique, it's so fact dependent, I would say.
Yeah. And, to think about, there's this sublime recognition that grandparents are a good thing for kids when they put into the analysis that there's got to be some visitation.
Right.
Now, if mom wasn't allowing any visitation, I would just wonder if the fact's completely the same. How would that ruling be? Because that was a strong point here. Is that mom was allowing visitation. There was nothing to show that she was being vindictive about it or anything like that. Wow, So there is a recognition about grandparents in a way, and of course it's balanced and everything. But that was interesting. So when I look at the case, I cry and I cheer. Okay, I cry because I love grandparents so much, and I think that they're so good for kids in most cases. And there's a lot of cultures where there's a hierarchy of families,
right. Absolutely.
And grandparents are very meaningful. So many people don't even have them, and so the folks that do are so blessed and fortunate they have grandparents, and to see, because there are cases where there's bad blood between the surviving parent and stuff. So that part makes me kind of sad. I'm sure that these people were very good grandparents.
Yeah.
Maybe they should have been instructed, though, to work with mom, and stuff, because we also know that there's constitutional rights, and I'm very proud of that as well.
Yeah.
It's like, we're not going to override your decisions. You're a parent and you're fit.
Yeah, I agree. Well-intentioned, probably parties on both ends. And again, I think the facts of this case, the underlying facts and the emotions that must be there for these parties. I mean, we've seen grandparent rights cases where it's a totally different set of facts, but this is just a sad scenario. They have a loss of a son, a loss of a husband, and ultimately probably everybody's just trying to act in the best interest of the children here. But I agree. I can see from a grandparent perspective and a parent perspective, myself, and that's why I said it's interesting that they did weigh in the reasonableness of the mom and how much she was granting visit, because I think there are cases where the facts could have been very different. And we saw that even in the court alluding to, she was giving more time than other cases and that they were comparing to.
Yeah. Now, the Troxel case, like I said, it was published a long time ago by the U.S. Supreme Court. If I recall this correctly, just so that the audience has some context here, that was a state of Washington code that was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court because it really was weighted too much in the grandparents' rights. And so in that case, there was a death of the father. I believe that the grandparents and the surviving parent, the mother, lived in different states. The surviving mother had offered visitation, and their ended up being a dispute, and one thing led to another. The grandparents filed the motion. Unlucky for them, it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they struck down the decision. But they did talk about in that case, the grandparents. I think they talked about it in that case. If not in that decision, then at least a seminar that I attended.
Yeah.
That when we counseled people, talk to them about, be careful, be very, very careful before you file a motion, because if the surviving parent is providing you with custody or giving you visitation, I should say, don't rock the boat, because you're dealing with something where you could be completely cut out. Now, in this case that we're talking about, mom's got a free reign, I think now, right? And it didn't have to be that way. And there's probably bad blood because you litigated.
Right, absolutely. Well, the court even kind of alludes to that in the opinion, right? They talk about the fact that even at the trial level, after they had filed this motion, mom was speaking to the fact that I'm still open to giving visitation. I still want them to have a relationship with, the grandparents here. I think that you bring a great point. It would be hard not to have a soured relationship in many regards if this motion came down the pipeline, if you're the parent, especially where mom was being, at least it seems very generous in the visitation time. So that's a great point when we're counseling clients, especially grandparents who come to our office, is to assess, holistically what is happening.
Yeah, you and I know that when people write declarations, sometimes they don't tone check those declarations, and they think that the more bullets they could shoot across to the other side, the better they're going to be.
Yep.
Well, those bullets can come bouncing back, if you get a bad decision, right? And you could just be, just burning the bridge, and stuff. So, especially
a grandparent's case where the court is, kind of indicating, look, we're not going to infringe on a parent's rights. It's not like a parent-parent case where both parties are going to have access to the children. Of course, we should keep the declarations, in check as well. But here you could really burn some bridges. Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, cool. Well, this was wonderful.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me on again.
Thank you. And once again, we love grandparents. So don't get the wrong message from watching this.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you for joining us on Exhibit A.